Welcome back to the Mainstream. Big debut time for Adam Creighton.
It's great to be here.
Great to be here on the Mainstream. So there's a lot to go through as always. I wanted to kick off with just a small topic, which is the future of the Liberal Party and doing a deal with One Nation. So what's prompted this is comments from a couple of people, but Tony Passon, who's been the main protagonist here. He's the member for Barker in South Australia. Now, this is a regional rural seat. It encompasses a large component of the southeast of the state. The main population centre is Mount Gambier. And what Tony Passon has said is that not only does he want to do potentially a preference deal with One Nation, for the Liberal Party to do that, but also to have a non-compete agreement, which is that One Nation would agree to not run against the Liberals in certain seats, and the Liberals would agree to not run against One Nation in certain seats, with the idea being, well, let's focus on Labor rather than ourselves. So my opinion on this is that this is the smart thinking in the Liberal Party. The reality is that there's very little that is going to stop the rise of One Nation. They are basically scandal-proof. People want change, and they think that Pauline Hanson and One Nation will deliver that change. And I think that if the Liberals don't do a deal of this sort with One Nation, that they will become as dead as a dodo.
Yeah, look, I think that's right. I think it's wishful thinking, though. I would say smart thinking, but wishful thinking as well on the coalition's part, on Tony Payson's part. Because why, from One Nation's point of view, would you do any deal at the moment when the momentum in the polls is still well and truly behind them? I don't think it's really settled yet where the primary vote's going to settle. Certainly at the federal level, there wouldn't be anything happening, just the election so far away. So it's the Victorian election, which is the interesting one. What was 5 months away? Very close. So they'll be very focused on that. And One Nation's ahead on many polls. So I think there's no incentive really for One Nation. Well, of course, they're running someone in every seat too. I mean, I don't think that's a secret. It's all 88 lower house seats. So I don't think there's going to be a non-compete clause there, but they're choosing candidates right now.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. I think if you look at, like, the reason I think Passon also has this perspective is being from South Australia. He saw the state election there, front up, where the Liberals got wiped out of the outer suburbs. I mean, they got single-digit primary vote. Right, this is something that people still don't fully understand, is they didn't come second or third, they came fourth in a lot of these outer suburban seats. So
amazing.
I think he's seen this, and I think the smart thinking in the party as well. We're going to have to weather the storm. One Nation is going to continue their rise. And I think if a deal isn't done, the Liberal Party risks becoming this sort of minor geographic party relegated to some urban fringes, kind of like the Lib Dems in the UK. They're kind of like a bit of a curiosity, but not really an influential nationwide player.
Yeah, look, I think that's a really good analogy, actually, the Lib Dems. That's what they're facing, I think, here, the Liberal Party. And the National Party, in Victoria, they're facing complete wipeout, total wipeout, losing all 10 of their seats, I think, if you look at the polls. So they'd be very, very worried. Yes, so look, like I say, I think the coalition would love to do a deal, but I'm not expecting one from One Nation. Maybe something will happen in Victoria, because both sides want to conserve their financial resources, I suppose, and not compete where they don't, where they think it's mutually going to make them worse off. But the primary vote polling hasn't settled down enough yet, I think, for One Nation to start thinking about that. Instead, it just keeps rising. It just keeps going up.
Yeah, and of course we've seen just over the last couple of weeks, last week, the massive fundraising from One Nation, the Fire the Liar.
Extraordinary stuff.
Have you ever seen anything like that?
No, I haven't. And, like Australia's, it's still a relatively small country at the end of the day, and here's a party that was a fringe party, raising $2.2 million, I think, when the original target was $1 million, and that would have been impressive. But here it is, 2.2, 2 or 3 days later.
Yeah,
it's very, and Prime Minister out there saying, "Oh, it's fake," and I don't think it is. And Senator Hanson was out this morning with audited proof, I think, that it's not fake. So another stupid mistake, I would say, from Anthony Albanese saying that if it's unlikely to be fake, right? So why would you say that?
Yeah, well, that's what Pauline Hanson said. She said, if I'm calling Albo a liar, then why would I lie about my fundraising?
Yeah, I know. That's exactly right. And also, they haven't revealed what, this was based on. This was, donate $29, wasn't it, or $27?
I think that was 29. Labor was the 27.
Yeah. And Labor hasn't revealed how much they've raised. So it's probably a pitiful amount.
Yeah. Oh, well, why would you give money to Labor? But, the other thing that's interesting is that a lot of the money that's come from this campaign, the fundraising campaign for One Nation, as far as I can tell, are basically battlers giving, $20-30 in the middle of a cost of living crisis. So these are people that are going to be most hit by the cost of living pressures, and they're still dishing out money to One Nation. And I reckon many of these people would never have given a cent to a political party in their life.
Yeah. Well, look, just this morning I had a tradesman at my house, and I said to him, "Who do we?" Well, he asked me what I do, and I said,
Get him on the podcast.
Anyway, I said,
Get him on the mainstream.
Do you follow politics at all? And he said, "Oh, yeah, but you don't want to know, you don't want to know who I support." And I said, "Oh, what's One Nation?" He said, "Yeah." And, he said, "Lots of my mates are now too." And I said, "Well, I kind of do as well. So you're not going to lose the contract.
Yeah,
it's okay."
Yeah.
It just goes to show the mood is changing. Even he's a small businessman.
Yeah.
Basically, there's a real groundswell in this state.
Did he say anything about the budget? Albo's budget?
No, he didn't say anything about the budget, but I didn't ask him. I'm sure he would have said it was bad. It's the most unpopular budget, right, since the 80s, I think. It's the 80s. It's one of Keating's budgets, I believe. But there's a huge groundswell of support amongst ordinary people, like you say, small business people. I mean, this business was just him and his mum and dad, and they're all, so 3 former coalition supporters, now 3 One Nation supporters.
There you go. Why do you think this has happened? Like you think about the Liberal Party, and since World War II, from I think 1949 when Menzies got in until 2022. They were in power federally for in coalition with the Nats, or the Country Party, for about 75% of the time. So they have been a hugely successful party through that measure. They've done a lot of very good things for the country. But this fall has been massive. It's been almost comprehensive, and it could actually end the party. It just feels like it's happened so swiftly.
Yeah.
From such a great height, it's happened quickly.
Yeah, both the Nats and the Liberal Party.
Yeah.
Both parties. And the National Party it's older, I believe, is it? I don't know. Don't put me on that.
Well, it is in terms of
1920s or something.
If you count its predecessor.
Yes. Yeah. But anyway, that's right. Look, I just think I feel more sorry for the Nats because I just think they get lumped together with the Liberal Party, but they do actually have different views, and they are more like One Nations. But they've arguably suffered they will suffer the most, arguably. But sympathies aside, I think the Liberal Party became too close to Labor on many policy things. They're both the same. They're largely indistinguishable. And look, frankly, if you just if you look at the financial statistics of Australia, the economic statistics, and you ask someone, show me where Liberals in power and show me where Labor's in power, you're not going to be able to do it, right? So what I'm saying is that they are the same, basically, in terms of the trajectories and so forth. Look, the Liberal Party tried to cut taxes a little bit more, and they're not as bad on spending, but it's just a matter of minor degree, really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think if you look at some of the big things like net zero, that was actually the Liberal Party policy. Morrison and Frydenberg came up with that. They joined with Labor. Also under the Morrison government, it was Paul Fletcher as the communications minister that started the misinformation laws.
Yes.
They didn't implement them at the time, but they're the ones that started it.
And the latest laws they backed enthusiastically.
The hate laws they backed. And I just think what has happened to the party is too often they put short-term political expediency ahead of sticking to your values and making an argument, even if it's sometimes harder to make that argument. And so the community has kind of said, well, time and time again, you've sort of done the opposite of what it is that you said that you believe in. And they go, well, we don't really trust you anymore to do the things that you're now saying you're going to do.
Yeah, look, and I think they don't talk enough about the economy and economic growth anymore, which is the issue that parties of the right tend to win elections on. They cede ground on health and education, talk about those things. The left will always win elections on those topics. So you've got to try. That's why every election, Labor brings out something to do with Medicare, anything. Just to talk about it, right? And then Liberals, talk about it too. So didn't Peter Dutton promise even more spending on Medicare?
I think he matched. He did, and then he matched it and said,
that was a mistake, I think, because Labor's still going to win it.
Yeah,
because people don't care, billion, trillion, million. It all just washes over people. I think the actual numbers.
Yeah. What do you reckon about this perspective that Australia is becoming a lot more like continental Europe in our political system, which is, a lot of countries in Europe, they have, a number of parties, 4, 5, 6 parties that get between 10 and 30% of the vote, and no one party ever gets a majority, basically. So there's always coalitions that are cobbled together on an ad hoc basis. I think Australia is basically becoming like that, and maybe already is like that. I know that we have a compulsory preferential voting system, which does change how the votes filter through the system. But do you reckon that's something that might be with us sort of on an ongoing basis, or is it just a short-term thing?
No, I think it's going to be an ongoing basis because, the old, class distinction, workers, capitalists, which kind of underpin the parties, the left and the right in the UK and in Australia. That's kind of breaking down. It's just more complicated now. There's a cultural injection into the economic war that there used to be. I mean, if you go back 50 years, the social and cultural values of both parties were basically the same, right? It was just the economic questions that were different. Pensions and taxation and expenditure. That's all the elections were about. They weren't about drag time story hour or all this other stuff. Okay, I'm being facetious, but you know what I mean.
Yep.
Now you've got that as well overlaid with the economics. It makes it very complicated. Again, the point I'm trying to make is just all this tribalisation of society, which leads to
the fragmentation
of the political system. The interesting point is our voting system, the Westminster system doesn't really lend itself to this, right? It's if you're going to have 8 parties with 8 and 15% of the vote, you really need proportional representation to make it make more sense, I think, because you're going to get huge and volatile flips in the number of seats based on a handful of votes.
Yeah.
It's very unpredictable in our system.
Yeah. Well, the observation has been made that I think it was Alex McDermott who wrote this. I think it was in the Australian a week or two ago, which is, in the early period immediately after Federation, it was sort of called the 311s, which they had. So there were 3 parties that were always rotating in terms of getting the vote before it sort of stabilised as we had the UAP, and then obviously after World War II. It sort of feels like it's going back to what we had in the immediate sort of couple of decades after Federation, which is very much a volatile, rotating set of parties and prime ministers. And, Billy Hughes, as an example, changed party many times. And that was kind of a normal part of the political system. I sort of feel that that's where we are again now.
Look, I think that's right. That could be, it's very, let's just see. I mean, back to the earlier point, it's the coalition that suffered most so far. Labor hasn't suffered as much, but the latest poll suggests that's starting to change. So anyway, the big poll we're interested in is the Victorian election. That's going to be very, very interesting.
Yeah. Right? You made a good point about the economics and culture stuff. And I think the biggest one there, which is both an economic and cultural issue, is immigration, right? Because it's had this mass migration program. And obviously there's a massive economic problem there. We know the per capita growth has been negative for 10 out of the last 15 quarters, which is the most protracted decline since digitised records began in the 70s. It's probably the biggest decline since the end of World War II, for sure. And then you've got the obvious cultural problems, the social fragmentation, the identity politics that you rightly talk about. I just wanted to run this stat past you that my colleague Dr. Kevin Yao, put out the other day, which was... in the 12 months to March 2026, so this is the most recent data, there were 489,300 long-term arrivals, permanent long-term arrivals on a net basis. So this is basically overseas migration. And the new supply of housing over that time was 174,500. So the new migration intake was 3 times the new housing supply in the country. And at the same time, we had about 432,000 migrants who are currently on bridging visas, right? So these are people that have come in on a visa. Yeah, people who have come in on a visa, and then that visa has expired, or they've done, they might be on a student visa, they finish their course, well, you're meant to go home, but they end up on a bridging visa while it gets stuck in this interminable tribunal process. So, I mean, the system's obviously totally broken.
Yeah, well, is it broken? If you're being cynical, it's great if you're if you're on the left, because you do just get hundreds of thousands of foreigners living here indefinitely, right? And all sorts too. We saw the High Court case this week about the non-citizens who've committed crimes who we can't expel, and now we're going to pay compensation to them. But yeah, just on this question, I mean, the first interesting thing about immigration is just how hard it actually is to know how many people are in the country, actually. And, we have these 2 stats, net overseas migration, and we have net permanent long-term arrivals, right? And they're both valid measures, right? They're different. Net overseas migration is the preferred one of the government because it's much lower, right? 300,000 a year or something at the moment.
Yep.
It's still very high, by the way.
By historical standards.
By historical standards, still extremely high. And then you've got this one, 489,000, right, which is substantially higher. Now, as I understand it, the difference is The NOM, the first one I mentioned, is an alteration of this more raw figure, if you like, of 490,000, which is derived from passenger cards. You know, when those stupid things when you arrive, you've still got to write down what you're doing, how long you're going to stay in Australia, whether you're coming back.
Yep.
That's what these stat is based on. Right now, some people lie, some people get it wrong, some people say they're going to stay but don't, some people say they're not going to stay but do. So, it's complicated, and then they adjust it somehow that if you've arrived and you're going to live 12 out of 16 months in Australia, then you're in the NOM as a migrant. I don't know how they do that, but that's the difference. But the point is, the figure's massive on either measure, and the housing supply increase is just hopeless, pathetic. I mean, in Kevin's release, he pointed out that the 12 months to March 2016, a long time ago, much smaller population then, there were far more homes built built than over the last 12 months.
Yeah.
So what on earth is going on?
Yeah.
One candidate is all the workers have been sucked into these stupid state government infrastructure projects. So, which of course bids up the wages massively through the whole sector because they tend to pay well, especially in Victoria, as we know, as the CFMEU. This just makes it so much hard to build homes. And 22 of the last month, there's not been a single month where they've achieved their target of the National Housing Accord, right?
They've basically sort of given up and conceded on that now because, they said they were going to build 1.2 million well-located homes, and every single month they've been behind on their schedule. So it's just not happening. The other thing is that Kevin has done as well is to actually look at the skilled visa stream, and what he's found is that about 2/3 of those who come in on a skilled visa aren't actually skilled. They're dependents. They're dependents of a skilled.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, okay, if you're going to have a dependent come in, let's have that debate, but don't call them skilled.
I think that's a fantastic point.
Visa, so.
And I hope we do a full research note on that because that's just a terrific story. The journalist in me says, what an amazing story.
Yeah.
But what an embarrassment. And, as the government always talks about, it's a skilled program, it's skilled, but it's not. It's nonsense. And actually, most of the people, by the way, granted migrants are already here, right? They're not actually coming from overseas because they only grant 180,000 or something permanent ones a year. And you've got 300,000 at least coming in every year. So the build-up, including on these bridging visas, is just huge.
Yeah. The single biggest contributor is the overseas migration. The foreign students is the single biggest cohort. One Nation announced a policy the other day where Pauline Hanson said universities are addicted to foreign student money. And what they're proposing is that foreign students who drop out of their Australian courses must leave the country, and they would be denied bridging visas and blocked from lodging appeals through the Australian Review Tribunal, which is part of the 430,000 bridging that's partly going to deal with that problem. So I think that's pretty sensible policy.
Absolutely, it's a sensible policy. There's no country of comparable size that has such a high proportion of foreign students. It's it's a corrupt system, right? This is lining the pockets of university bureaucrats. That's why there's so many of them on enormous salaries. We talk about the vice chancellor salaries, $1 million, which is outrageous by the standards of any country. But then there's the second tier, all the pro vice chancellors, the deputy vice chancellor. These people are all on $700,000, $800,000 a year. And that's how they're paid for this, right?
Hi, thanks for watching. Did you know that 3/4 of you watching this podcast aren't currently subscribed to the IPA's YouTube channel? So do us a favour, hit subscribe and you won't miss any of the action. While you're at it, head to ipa.org.au, follow the prompts to subscribe to the IPA's website, so that way you will find all of our research and analysis. Now back to the chat.
And actually, I encourage listeners and viewers to go and listen to Martin Parkinson's interview recently. Former.
Tell us about that.
Well, look, he was remarkably candid.
So Martin Parkinson was a big deal in the public service.
Very big deal. Head of the Treasury, head of the PMC. He's now Chancellor of Macquarie University, I think, or he's Chancellor of one of the universities. And admirably, I guess he'd have a wonderful pension, right? So he can say whatever he wants and still get paid quite a lot. And he basically came out and said the immigration system is far greater than the public want. He said we're not getting the right people. He said it's I don't think he used the word corrupting, but he said it's undermining the respect for the universities. He said it's reducing the quality of the universities. He said all the things that we would say and that One Nation would say, maybe in different language, but it was remarkably candid from someone, from an insider who was part of the whole process.
Yeah. Yeah. No, look, fascinating stuff. I wanted to, just on that topic, you wrote a great column a couple of months ago on the Canadian experience. So this was when the Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney came to Australia, and you wrote a great column that went through the immigration cuts and also the net zero sort of back away in Canada. But the most fascinating thing to me was the immigration cuts, where the population went backwards, right?
Yeah, for the first time since Second World War, right? So
Canada
that's
went
in
back,
Canada
yeah.
for the first time, and it's gone backwards 2 quarters in a row, right?
Right.
So it wasn't just some statistical aberration.
Do you have any
it is-
reports from Canada as to whether the sky is still there? Or has it,
Yeah, well,
has it
well,
fallen in?
the sky hasn't fallen in, but I tell you, dwelling prices have collapsed. So,
Have they?
yeah, they're down. That's why I think, we're very similar to Canada structurally. The only difference really is the French component of Canada. That's about the only difference. Everything else, the population size, the governance structure, the British heritage, Westminster system, the banking systems are very similar.
Sources sector.
Yeah, resources. Yeah, resources. I mean, so what's happening over there should be of great concern, I think, to the government, right? So house prices in Canada, dwelling prices, I should say, both apartments and houses, are down 22% in 2 years, right? That's quite significant, right? If that happened here, there wouldn't be, a lot of people would be very concerned, and it's very likely to happen here too because they're just a little bit further ahead. I mean, that's what I would say, and the prompting of this is partly the huge collapse in immigration, right? This the government, radically tightened rules around students and temporary migrants, which I think is probably going to happen here, whether it's Labor does it or One Nation does it or whatever. It's going to happen because people want it to happen, and it will happen eventually. So when that happens, and you've also got rising interest rates here at the same time, and then thirdly, the budget, you've got increased capital gains tax as well. So you've got this like triple whammy, right? And so of course dwelling prices are going to go down a lot, I would say. You'd have to be mad right now to buy a home in Sydney or Brisbane or Perth, I would say. And so that's why, no wonder the auction clearance rate is
People are just
70
waiting.
low. People are just waiting because you don't know what's going to happen. And I think someone from Westpac came out yesterday, Carolyn McCann, I think, just said that loan approvals are down, 30% or something since the budget.
Yeah.
So people are just waiting.
Yeah.
But if everyone waits, right, you will see a big fall in prices, and then people start to panic, and then people put their homes on the market to sell it before it falls more, and it can be a disaster.
This is the correction we need, though, isn't it?
Well, yeah. Look, I mean, to your point, I'm not saying this is
Pretty-
a bad thing.
yeah.
Okay. I'm kind of
It's gonna be bad
I'm
if
kind
you're
of torn on this.
Homeowner, right?
It is, and I'm kind of torn on this because, a sharp decline in home values, especially in a country like Australia, where so much of the wealth is tied up in dwelling values, can trigger a wider recession, right?
Yeah.
It can. It might not, but it can.
Why
it's
that?
not-
What's the mechanism?
Well,
It's
because people feel poor.
wealth effect.
Yeah, the wealth effect.
Less spending.
The wealth effect, then construction, housing construction is a big part of the labour force. If people don't renovate as much or don't that sort of thing, you'll see a lot of unemployment through that channel. If prices are falling, you won't get as much investment in new dwellings because people don't want to do it. They'll lose money, so therefore less construction again. So there are loops, feedback loops through which it's bad. But
Yeah. Just on, you mentioned the budget and the effects of the budget. So this budget came out close to a month ago now. What's your sort of assessment of where it's at? Is the government going to back down on certain parts, or they're just going to forge ahead? Is this as big of a deal to the economy as what people are saying? I mean, what's your sort of
yeah, well, look, I think for the reasons we just discussed, I think the impact on the housing market is the tip of the spear, and let's just wait and see. So far, it's not looking good, because we've discussed the auction clearance rates. There's, we're seeing dwelling prices fall over the last month in the major capitals. So we have to wait and see a bit. But, the budget was a terrible budget. It was not reform. It was just an increase in tax, really. I mean, there were reformist elements to it. I mean, I've argued before that, taxing inflation is bad, and a system that doesn't tax inflation, which has indexation, is good, but you've got to lower all the rates at the same time, and they haven't done that at all. In fact, they've increased one. Well, they put a 30% minimum tax, which for many people is actually a huge increase, right? For younger people whose marginal rate is already very low, and selling some shares on the side, their tax rate's gone from, in some cases, 0 to 30, or at least will if the legislation's passed. Are they going to back down? Probably not. I mean, they can't now because they've been so emphatic in recent days that they're not. So if they were thinking about it, they wouldn't have been so emphatic, I think. But look, I mean, if the polls turn really bad, maybe they'll be hoping the Greens, suggest a change in the Senate, and then they use that as an excuse to drop the
Get out of it.
to get out of it. Okay, and so they might be hoping that the Greens, make an amendment, just anything, just make any amendment, and then the government say, okay, we're not going to do it.
Yeah.
So let's just wait and see. I mean, I believe it's in the Parliament now, is it?
Well,
This
west of the
up?
lower house.
Yeah,
They're
but
doing some sham consultation.
that's right. Well, I think they'll make changes to the startup tech front, almost certainly,
Yep.
and something with charities, I think, as well. But I don't think they're going to change it that much.
And your claim to fame is that the Treasurer quoted
Oh,
you
yes, that's right, actually. Yes, that's
supporting
right,
the poll.
actually.
Tell us about that. What
Yeah,
happened
that's
there?
right,
I didn't know
actually.
you were a big fan of the
That's
change.
right, exactly.
What did he
Yes,
say?
well, the IPA was mentioned in Parliament last week, saying that the IPA was one of many supporters of the tax changes. And look, he was, he quoted one sentence from a piece that I wrote back in March, well before the budget, which just argued, like I said, that a system that doesn't tax inflation is superior to one that does. And, that there is an element of that in the government's changes, obviously. And so he quoted the sentence that misleadingly implied that we supported it. But of course, we did not support it. So we have not supported it.
What's the problem with taxing inflation? Is it because you're
well-
basically getting taxed on not real money?
Yeah, that's
not
right.
real
You're being-
gains. You
yeah, that's
make
right.
Gain and you,
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's quite insidious. I mean, so for instance, many people in the housing market don't understand inflation, right? It's called money illusion in economic speak, and it's very widespread. People just have no idea. They think that the nominal price goes up, that they've made money, but they actually haven't, right? I mean, I did a study recently, it's a column, and I looked at the money supplier inflation, if you like, over 10 years, and money supply is up 85%. And so are house prices, right? So, I mean, a lot of it is just inflation. They haven't actually made any profit, but you'll be taxed on it, though, under the old system. I mean, under a system where you index for inflation, if the CPI goes up by the same amount as your dwelling price, then you won't pay any tax at all. So, for instance, let's take the last couple of years. So we've had inflation of 4% now, 5%. Yep. So, if your house hasn't gone up by 5% in the last year, then it's gone down in value, right? And a lot of people don't understand that.
Yeah. So this would be kind of like the capital equivalent of inflation, the indexing of, when, what do they call it? The bracket creep.
Yes, that's right.
That's kind of like a similar thing.
So the other reason
basically
is because governments love inflation, right? And that's just another reason to love it, because if they create it, then they get to tax it as well. So, they love it because of bracket creep in this country. It's wonderful because it pushes all the wages higher, and then they raise more money without having to pass a single law, right? It's very, very wrong. But if you tax it through capital gains, and that's another avenue through which they like it too, because if they push up all the prices, then they tax people's capital gains on it as well. So,
right.
And so it's, all governments have always loved inflation going back centuries. They used to undermine the currency by kind of taking out little bits of silver from the coins and hoping no one noticed. They're all the sneaky things kings used to do. And it's still the case now. Governments love inflation for those reasons. It's a tax ultimately on people without having to pass a law.
It's like, when you mentioned the money supply, it reminded me of, I think it was Milton Friedman's quote, which is inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon. So basically, if you're cranking out the money supply, you're going to get inflation.
I mean, let's not get technical, but money supply has been growing at 8% a year for a couple of years.
Is that right?
Right. So that's a lot faster than anything else.
Why do they do? Do you know why they do that? This is the RBA
It's not a decision. Well, no, it's not really the RBA. I mean, people think it's the government. It's actually not the government. I mean, the government sets the regulations that the private banks follow, but the private banking system creates the money.
So to do with the rate, like the ratios.
So APRA sets those ratios, right? And there's a lot of them. There's a lot of ratios, and they're a bit technical. And it's the incentive of the private banks, the big four, basically, who are like 90% of our banking system. So when they make loans, business loans, mainly housing loans, that's really all they do. They're really just building societies. Our big banks don't do anything else, really. So whenever they grant a loan, so you borrow $1 million, that's a new $1 million that didn't exist before, right? A lot of people don't understand that.
It's hard to.
They're not really lending to you. They're creating the money and giving it to you.
Right. It's hard to understand because it's like if you put in, $100 into a deposit account, the bank is allowed to lend way more than $100. Right? If it was a 1-to-1 ratio, it would be you can only lend out the money that you have in the vault.
Yeah. So
there's a ratio which is like you can lend out 10 or 20 times the amount that's in the vault or something like that.
Yeah. So I mean the binding constraints. So there are things around that, but it's mainly banks have to keep a certain amount of equity, if you like, for different types of assets they hold. So housing loans, if they buy government debt. So the big sneaky thing not many people understand is that for government debt, state and federal government debt, they don't have to keep any equity. So basically what that means is it's extremely lucrative for banks to hold or lend to governments, right? Which of course governments like. That's why they make the rule. But if they lend to a business, right, a small business, it's extremely expensive for the bank to do that, and that's why businesses pay so much more in interest than the government. Right.
Right. Well, talking about the state debt, I know you've written a couple of columns on this, and I just wanted to quickly touch on the South Australian budget, simply because it was handed down just over a week ago. And so it tells the story that we see certainly in Victoria and elsewhere, which is debt is going up pretty rapidly. So it's at about 34.6 billion. It's going to head to 53.6 billion by 2030. Which would put it at about 25% of gross state product, which is around where Victoria is at the moment. So you've got South Australia heading towards Victoria-style levels. I think that you, at least like in terms of having an apples to apples comparison, obviously South Australia is a much smaller economy. You wrote about the massive state debt. I think it was it 1.6 trillion for federal plus state?
Yeah, that's right.
Like
It's probably higher than that now because it's going up. Yeah, that was a month or so ago. But the reality is the states, the total of state debt is now about 750 billion, right? So it's getting up near the total Commonwealth, which is about it's a trillion, sorry, isn't it?
Yeah.
A trillion, and it's going to 1.2 trillion. That was well reported after the budget. But the rate of increase of the states is far greater. So, I haven't put a year on it yet, but I'm doing some research at the moment that will try to work out when it's going to cross over, assuming trends continue.
That's interesting.
And it'll be in the next few years. So the states combined will have greater debt than the Commonwealth. And it's a really big problem for the country because the states, Dan Andrews was quite insightful in this way because he realised that ultimately Victoria could borrow as much as it wanted and it wouldn't pay any penalty in the financial markets, and it hasn't. Right? It's still okay. The credit rating went down, but who cares? No one really looks at that. The interest rates that Victoria pays are basically the same as every other state. Right? No penalty whatsoever.
Is that because the financial markets assume there'll be a bailout?
Yeah, of course. So they assume, and certainly foreign investors assume, who know very little about our governance structure. They just see Australia, right? They believe, and probably rightly, that if there was ever a default by a state, or if a state was going to default, the Commonwealth would step in and stop it from happening. Because if it didn't, then Australia would be seen, including the federal government, which in this circumstance would have done nothing wrong, would be perceived as a bad credit risk, right? And it would affect the whole country. So quite rightfully, and so Dan Andrews just basically borrowed like crazy. I mean, I've got the figures here. When he came in, state debt was 18 billion, and pretty soon it's going to be 200 billion, right? I mean, that's just extraordinary, in just 10 years. And has there been any penalty? No, nothing. So if the federal government did the same thing, increased tenfold, there'd be a huge penalty, right? Yeah. The interest rates for Australia would go like crazy, and they just couldn't do it, right? So they've got to be more careful. And anyway, the point is the other states have all seen this, and they go, oh,
yeah, we
can do that, and they all have. So he started it in Victoria, and the others now are all catching up.
Yeah, right.
And that's quite scary.
Yeah. With the South Australian budget, you'll be pleased to know that they're putting this money to good places, though. So they got.
Yes.
I just want to read this out because this is insane, right? So we had the Voice to Parliament vote. You might remember that. I think we voted no, didn't we?
Yes.
No?
Yes.
Yeah.
I voted. I actually went to the embassy in Washington to vote no, specifically for that. I couldn't be bothered voting for the federal election, to be honest, but I did vote for that one.
There you go. And in South Australia, it was about a 65% no vote. But what we have in South Australia, people call him Peter Malinauskas, but you know what he's known as in South Australia? Peter Wokenauskas.
Okay, well, that's
He is the wokest premier in Australia by a long way. He's even woker than Jacinta Allen. And let's listen to this. So the South Australian government is taking further steps towards reconciliation with the state budget in investing, not spending, investing 8.5 million to establish a commission to undertake truth-telling and progress treaty activities. Here's some quotes here from the relevant minister. Yeah, truth-telling is an essential step toward the reconciliation process. This investment will further support a formal agreement between the state government and Aboriginal South Australians aiming to close the gap and improve outcomes. We are the first jurisdiction in Australia to establish a First Nations voice to state parliament. So they're actually bragging about the fact that they ignored democracy
Oh,
It's just
extraordinary.
It's just extraordinary what
Yeah,
they're doing.
well, I
and
think
they
they
get
need
away
to-
with it.
Yeah, I think we need to give them some truth telling. I mean, basically about all this.
I wanted to get your perspective. So I thought it was a really great column you wrote on another sort of area where there's a clear disconnect, between the public and the political class. And you wrote a great article about all of the fear and hysteria behind the climate science. And,
Yes.
this has been something that's been debated for a long time, but you've only been allowed to kind of say this over the last couple of years, right? To actually question some of the
It's all
edifice.
collapsing, thank God. It's a
Yeah.
house of cards.
And you referenced a couple of really interesting studies that I hadn't come across. Just wanted you to explain what it was. I thought it was fascinating stuff.
Yeah, two pretty new ones. The first one looks specifically at reporting of the climate change. So, the big what is the name of the integrated
IPCC.
Yeah, the IPCC reports, which come out every few years. They're thousands of pages, right? And they're contributed to by hundreds of scientists, many well-meaning scientists all around the world. Okay, it's a big process. That's why it's every few years. And then there is a summary for policymakers. That's what it's called, of say 50 pages that summarizes those reports. Now, the first problem is they're the only things the media really reads, those things, those summaries, right? Which is fair enough. But those summaries are themselves very biased towards the hysterical end of the spectrum. So that's the first conclusion that this study makes, and it uses AI to do so, using various metrics. So I mean, one of the wonders of AI is you can crunch a lot of data now in very, very interesting ways. And this is using language, searching for words, etc. And that's what they did. So these summaries are biased, but then the more interesting thing is then they went through using AI 112,000 articles from the 10 biggest UK and US media outlets, both left-wing and right-wing outlets. And they looked at the framing of those articles, which were based on the summaries. And for 9 of the 10 media organisations, it was fear-mongering and scaremongering, basically. They were leaving out the qualifying things that were necessary for various claims. And of course, the policy point of all this is what the people read. And that's why people are scared. Well, many people, I'm not scared. I don't think you're scared either. But many people out there are scared of climate change. And it's because a lot of kids are. We've, Claire Rowe from the IPA and Colleen Harkin as well from the IPA, they've done good work on this, for years, showing how scared and frightened a lot of people, especially young people, are. And this is having terrible consequences. People are not having children. They're not getting married. I mean, it's just crazy, right? And yet, Al Gore's, Inconvenient Truth, I think, 20 years ago this year, and there are a lot of predictions in that. Not one of them's come true.
Yeah.
Not one.
And there's no accountability, right?
None. I mean, it staggers me that people don't pay more attention to all these predictions that don't come true, but, I won't comment about, the attention span of the average person. Probably not going to be.
What you wrote in here is there was a paper published in MBER, which had a study on the ideological character.
Yes, this was the second one.
Social science. And what you wrote is that about 90% of politically relevant social science articles lean to the left between 1960 and 2024. 90%.
Yeah, 90%. So that was another huge study that used AI because it looked at all these journal articles since 1960, right? And there's a lot, believe me, there's a lot of journal articles out there in the social sciences, right? And it found that extraordinary statistic. And not only were 90% of them left-wing, but he also came up with a measure of the political leaning of social departments in all universities, right? And they have become more left-wing over time. If you go back to the 1950s and 60s, and certainly in the US, there's been surveys of, who voted Republican, who voted Democrat, and it was much, much more even back then. But now you'd be lucky to find any Republicans at university in the US.
Yeah.
It'd be a handful, but it'd be tiny.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to end on what I would consider to be a good news story about the national anthem.
Yes.
So people are getting around the anthem, which is good. And of course, I talked the other week to our colleague Morgan about the great work he's done on the anthem and the polling that we've done. And the National Party of New South Wales has said that it wants children to sing the national anthem at school at least once per week, which I think is a great idea. That would come on the back of the Northern Territory government, which earlier this year mandated that all its public schools must play and sing both verses of Advance Australia Fair, and students are expected to stand while the anthem plays.
Yeah, well, look,
it's a good idea, I reckon.
Yeah, it's an extremely good idea. I mean, I'm kind of, I guess I'm not surprised it doesn't happen, but it certainly happened when I was at primary school in Sydney in the 1980s. Bangor Public School, every week we had to sing the national anthem, both verses, and stand up at the assembly. That was, I assume, I wonder whether that was a state government directive. I don't know, but it was certainly good practice, and so we all learnt the words. Well, actually, that was the version that was, we are young and free, not one and
free. Yeah.
so it was a different version, but it's a very good practice. Of course, that should be the case. It's extraordinary. It's not, isn't it? Really, it's very sad.
Yeah, and just to remind everyone, we did commissioned some polling about a month ago on this issue, and what we found is 71% of Australians supported the Northern Territory government's decision to do this. Only 10% disagreed. That included 66% of 18 to 24-year-olds. So this is the cohort that's most
really
recently come out of school. And in terms of, we had a question about the, do you think the national anthem should replace Welcome to Country at sporting events and other major events? And 71% said yes, 11% said no, again, including 69% of 18 to 24-year-olds. So I just think, people have had a gutful of the welcome. I know we bang on about this a lot, but it's such an important thing because it's alienating.
Yeah, I know, and divisive, especially on Anzac Day.
Yes. So I just reckon replace Welcome to Country with the anthem, and that'll fit.
I think that's a good, if that was, if that's not already One Nation policy, it probably should be based on those figures that you just read out.
I think it'll be someone's policy.
Yeah, exactly.
It'll be someone's policy.
It seemed an easy vote winner, right? Just to go back to doing something that was pretty standard in the 80s and 90s.
Yeah, and most people want, as we talked about at the start, the fragmented society that we live in.
I know, they want some more unification.
People want unification.
If you're going to have a nation, if you're going to have a national government, then there's got to be some sort of, unifying principles, right?
Far too sensible.
Yeah.
Far too sensible.
Thank you.
So, anyway, great to chat, Adam.
Likewise, great to be here.
Work.
Yep, hope I get to come back.